Gabe, it is just another podcast. I can't say that seriously because people don't know the visual I have with me today. But just an otter podcast, Gabe. But I was thinking over the weekend, I saw this Reddit thread, and it was talking about what was the most memorable TV ad you've seen. And Gabe, I really thought I had to bring that up on the podcast, and I'll share with you mine. But any TV ads specifically you remember or get stuck in your head?
So I think you and I probably think about this a little bit differently. I remember the TV ads that I hate.
Oh,
probably more than the TV ads that I like.
We might agree on this.
The ones that I don't watch a lot of TV ads anymore, because if I do watch any sort of TV, that's not streaming content, I'm watching it on a DVR and fast forwarding through commercials. But the ones that stick out to me are, I love the NCAA basketball tournament. It is one of my favorite sporting events all year, right? It's fantastic. It's 4 days, especially those first 4 days. It's just great, right? And I used to actually take those 2 days off, the Thursday and Friday of the tournament, and I would just sit on my couch and I would have like 3 screens going and I would watch basketball all day long. And it was glorious. But the one really bad part about that is they play the same 4 or 5 commercials over and over and over again. And by the Saturday of that tournament, you're just ready to take your TV, your laptop, or whatever you happen to be watching on and throw it directly out the window, because they're some of the worst commercials. It's always insurance commercials. I think Chevy obviously is a huge sponsor. So just a lot of Chevy ads. Those are the ones that I remember and I hate.
Any specific ad that you just don't want to bring up at all, but is memorable?
I remember there was one, it was probably like 6 or 7 years ago, and I don't remember the band, but there was a band that was on this one, and they were on a bus, and it was a Chevy ad, and they were singing this song. It was a popular song at the time, and it was a terrible song and a terrible ad, and I probably saw it like 400 times in that first weekend, and I just viscerally hated that song.
So you will not be buying a Chevy just because of that ad then, right?
Yes, exactly. I am like Jerry Seinfeld. I will not buy it out of spite.
That's my kind of vibe, man. I've got a couple ads. One I think is good. One is just memorable. I don't really have an opinion on it, but like the song gets stuck in my head, and that's all I can think about. But the one that gets stuck in my head is, do you remember like the 877 Cash Now commercials?
Oh, yeah, those are bad.
Oh my gosh. That song gets stuck in my head every now and then. That and the Stanley Steamer carpet cleaning. Those things just get stuck in my head, but those ones were very popular on this Reddit thread where everyone was like quoting the ads. But on the other side of that spectrum.
Hey, can I ask a quick question?
Yes.
Is Cars for Kids a national thing, or is that just a local Bay Area thing? Have you heard of Cars for Kids?
No, but I'm kind of scared to ask questions.
Okay. It's a charity, and they have ads, and it is, I'm going to have to look this up and send it to you later on YouTube, but which aligns nicely to what we're going to be talking about today. But it is the worst jingle you have ever heard in your entire life, and once you hear it, you cannot unhear it. So I'm really looking forward to ruining it.
Cool, man. Keep that to yourself, and we'll move on. But the other ads I think is very memorable, and this is like one, like I've seen like every ad on YouTube, I think, at this point. In college, we did a lot of projects on these ads too, but the Apple, Mac, and PC ads specifically. But that whole series, I think those are more on the good side than like the bad and annoying. But I think they did a fantastic job with those. There's one specifically that comes to mind, and this was in the Reddit thread too. But it was that, we actually probably talked about this on the podcast, I think, but they were decorating the Mac and PC guy a Christmas tree, and like they had strung like, PC rules into the Christmas tree lights. And I just think that's fantastic. And, it's an Apple ad, and, PC rules and is the message of the ad. So I think they just, were able to spin that in a fantastic direction. But I think those are something like the more memorable ads. But to your point, Gabe, is, I feel like with streaming content, you see a lot of the same ads. I stream all my TV too. I will never have cable TV, and I will promise you that. But a lot of these ads, I had to go back up and I looked them up on YouTube, and I realized that I could create a playlist of just all these old ads from TV. And I'm surprised nobody has, but YouTube is really where I was going to, oddly enough, look up advertisements.
It's kind of ironic because you probably had to watch an ad before you actually watched said ad, but it's like very meta, man.
Dude, I'm thinking of like so many like bad TV ads right now. We got to get off this subject.
Yeah, we do need to get off the subject and get on to some other ones. So let's transition to what we actually wanted to talk about today, which is you and I were reading some research that just came out over the last couple of weeks from the Pew Research Center or organization about what teens are doing on social media and with technology. And they surveyed, I forget what the number, I think it was about 1,500, right? If I remember correctly.
Yeah, why
I looked
not?
at the number. Okay. I think it was around 1,500, but decent sample size of teens all across different age brackets from 13 to 17, different areas, urban, suburban, rural, different ethnicities as well. So a really wide group of people that they surveyed. And I realize some people may be listening to this and going, well, who cares who cares what teenagers do on social media? That doesn't make any difference to me. But I would say these folks are going to be your consumers very soon, right? So, and in many ways they're consumers already, but they're going to be in their early 20s, they're going to be in their late 20s, they're going to be in their 30s, and not too long. And the habits that they're displaying now are going to carry forward into the future. I mean, Zach, I'm sure you've seen that with some of the habits that you had growing up, and how you consume content, and now the things that you engage with, from an internet and technology perspective now, right?
No, yeah, I think you're totally spot on, Gabe. And it's funny because I feel like the apps I grew up with are still the ones I use. The big one I would say, on my list that I don't really use is Facebook, but we'll dive into that comment in a few minutes.
Yeah.
But for the most part, I'm relatively big into Instagram, Snapchat, and whatnot. But there's a lot of new platforms coming out. TikTok is still pretty new that a lot of these teens and whatnot are using. And again, get back to your point. The reason we want to bring these up today is these will be your customers soon. These are going to be the people buying your products and buying your services soon. So if you want to choose to ignore these platforms, that's probably not a good choice. But and this isn't to say you should flock over to these new apps and platforms today and just spit content out. But I think it begins the conversation of how do I adapt the content and my tactics now for this next generation of people that will be buying my product.
See, that I think is the key point right there, Zach, is how do you start to think about using these channels now so that you're ready to use them in the future? And how do you really think deeply about what do these different channels look like from a strategy perspective for me long term? And maybe start dabbling a little bit now, right? Start dabbling a bit now so that you can learn. Because I don't know about you, I'm a learn by doing guy,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that to me is the most effective way to learn. And it's like, hey, go spend a couple $100 on some of these platforms, see what type of engagement you get. But now is the time to start planning and testing. That way, when you're ready to really dive in and jump into the deep end of the pool, so to speak, you've already gone through those, kind of initial painful learnings of figuring out what the heck you're doing, right?
Oh, totally. And Gabe, some of the platforms we're going to be talking about today, like you technically, well, not even technically, you don't have to pay to get started on them. You can go and begin, creating content and building that testing strategy and seeing what works, seeing what doesn't, and then, adapt from there. But let's go ahead and dive into this, Gabe. And I want to start out with, I feel bad asking you this question because we both already know the answer, but to everyone listening, the number one social media platform that is, used by 95% of teens, think about what you think that would be. And, I'll give you a couple of seconds here, but 95% of teens use this app, and it's not TikTok. So that answer's out, but it's actually YouTube. Gabe, what do you think about that? Because we've talked about TikTok a lot, but seeing that, 95% of these teens in this study are on YouTube, what does that statistic tell you?
I mean, I was pretty surprised that YouTube was number one. I sort of expected TikTok to be the top. And I think the growth of YouTube was what surprised me as well. So one thing we should mention, so this study, they did the same study in 2014/15, and then now did the same study again in 2022. And so the results are comparing those answers that they got in 14/15 to answers that they're getting now. And the growth of YouTube was astounding to me, Zach. I mean, YouTube has been a big application for a long time, but I think the number went, I want to say it went from like 60 something percent up to 95% of teens are using YouTube. I'm remembering that correctly, right?
Dude, YouTube is one of, I'm not a teen, but YouTube is one of my favorite apps. If it's looking up how to do something, if it's, maybe watching a clip from Hot Rod or something. I'm big into watching, I'll plug this YouTube channel. I'm big into watching Sam the Cooking Guy. He's a guy in San Diego who, basically has different recipes he shows you in his backyard. It's stuff like that. But I think that's the kind of content that people, enjoy consuming. It's basically a visual Google. If you want to learn how to do something, it's the search engine with video. That's really how I use it. Gabe, how do you use YouTube? I know we've got a little bit of a gap here, but definitely want to know what your social media habits are.
Well, so you mentioned something there that I want to hit on. Search engine. YouTube is the second most popular search engine in the world behind Google. So Google owns the top two search engines. Obviously Google for, standard search, and then YouTube for video search. So YouTube is the second most popular search engine in the world behind Google. So I think that's really important. But to answer your question more directly, how do I use it? It's a lot of the same ways that you're talking about, how-to content, right? I think, when I'm trying to figure out how to do, especially like random stuff around the house, it's like, I'm going to YouTube that, right? And I'm going to find a video that, walks me through the process of, give you an example. My kids took a bunch of markers and colored all over my granite countertops a couple of weeks ago. Well, granite is porous, and then that crap sinks in. And now I'm like, awesome. So now my kids have made a mess of these, expensive countertops. Well, go on YouTube, find a little video about how to make a weird little paste that you make out of baking soda and soap. You put that stuff over it, you let it sit there for a day, and then you wipe it right up, and magically it comes up. So it's just random stuff like that you're like, oh man, I had no idea. This is amazing. And I can go on YouTube and find a quick how-to video on how to actually do this stuff. It's great.
Dude, that's totally it. But I got to go back. How are the countertops looking today? Or did YouTube help you there?
Totally worked. Totally worked.
I got to make a note of that. Future problem, future solution. But I'm a big YouTube fan, so seeing that it is number one, it was a little surprising. But the more I think about it, the more I realize like my habits myself, combined with many people I talk to, it kind of makes sense.
Well, the other one I use it a lot for is music, and I know a lot of people use YouTube for music, so I'm not unique there. But especially for like I love live music, and I like live versions of songs usually more than album versions of songs. So, if I'm looking for a particular song, I love going out to YouTube and finding live versions of it. And a lot of times you'll even find entire concerts out there that people have put online, right? So you can, sit there and listen to an entire live concert. So I love it from that perspective as well.
And Gabe, I should point out now in the podcast that we'll share this study in the notes just so people can go through and look at this data too. But it also brings up,
there's some great data in there.
It brings up another question I think we should ask everyone, everyone listening who won't respond. But is YouTube a social media platform? That question came up today in our team chat here. And, my answer was yes, obviously. Like, why wouldn't it be? But I think we got some mixed results on that. What do you think? Is YouTube a social media platform?
So I think it was Lauren who said this, one of our coworkers, and I think she had the most astute observation, which is, yes, absolutely, it's a social application because people are sharing content from YouTube, people are commenting on content in YouTube, and they're posting content on YouTube. And with YouTube Shorts, I think this even extends that idea of YouTube being a social application even more, where people are creating this short content 60, 90 seconds, whatever, to then drive people back to longer form content on YouTube. So I absolutely think it's a social channel. I did think it was I don't want to like disparage our team too much here, um, but it was interesting, the age brackets, right? So, the folks who are a little bit younger tended to say yes, YouTube is a social application, and the folks who are more in my age bracket tended to say no, no, YouTube is not a social application. I don't know.
Man, is this?
I realize small sample size.
I was gonna say, is this gonna be like
did
one of those
notice that.
things like in like back in my day, YouTube was not a social media. But I think it is. I agree with all this because in my opinion, you've got the comment section, you've got people uploading content, you've got people interacting with each other. It's not at the base of it, it's not too much different from Facebook. You can subscribe to channels, you can comment on things, you can share content. Obviously, it's a totally different platform, but I think at the base, it's definitely a social media platform. So, as we call that the number one social media platform here with this survey, these results, to me, I think it fits right in.
I agree. Yeah, I totally agree with that. The other thing I thought that was really interesting that came out of that study was I mentioned that they did it for different areas, urban, suburban, rural, and different age groups. Kind of breaking that teenager group up into different chunks, as well as different ethnicities as well. And for YouTube specifically, there was almost no difference in how many people were watching YouTube across those different segments. Whereas TikTok, Instagram, Snapchat, some of those other applications did have some pretty significant differences across urban, suburban, rural, some of these other breakdowns as well. But YouTube was consistent across. It was like 93, 95, 95. I mean, it was just mid to high 90s basically across the board for every single group. I don't know if that jumped out to you as well.
You pointed that out and, got me thinking too. I'm like, what have I been using these different apps? Because I grew up in a relatively rural community. So I was thinking of like what apps were like all of my friends using growing up and everything. But I think one thing we had in common was YouTube. And I don't know why that was the case, but I think it's really just sharing that video content with everyone and having those uploads that you can see. But I think that kind of content is just going to perform very well. And the thing with YouTube too is you're not focusing on 6-second vines or 60-second TikToks. Or, I had to bring up Vine, but I just think the content itself is just totally different than what people see on TikTok too.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, definitely longer form content is perfectly okay, right? People sort of expect that. And people, I think, have done a good job on chapterizing content. So, when you go and look something up on YouTube, you're seeing these different chapters that you can quickly jump to a section of the video if you want to. People have gotten a lot smarter about that. YouTube's gotten a lot smarter about it too, and pushing you even to the middle or the end of a video if you search for a specific thing, right? There's
Gabe, can I jump in here with my favorite YouTube feature? And this might be,
Please,
and when I say this is new, I don't know how new it is, but it's new. But when you like scrub the bottom timeline of a video, have you noticed, Gabe, that there'll be like a little spike and it'll say most replayed? So you can actually go to the most replayed part of a video, which is funny because I was watching like a comedy bit a while back and I went back like the following day because I wanted to pull this specific clip to share with a friend. And sure enough, I moved the line and right there it says most replayed. So you can see how other people are engaging with these YouTube videos too. I think that's a pretty cool feature.
That is a really cool feature. I've not noticed that, but that's a really cool feature and sort of validates our point about YouTube being a social platform because they know that people are going in there and grabbing clips to share. And so that's a perfect way for them to make clips more shareable and drive more eyeballs to YouTube, right?
It's totally it. I mean, I told you right there, I was sharing a clip with a friend and that's how I went about it.
Yeah. So all of this to say, right? Again, I think the point of us bringing this up is not to say teens are on YouTube. Okay, I think everybody was probably pretty aware of that, but to think about how you want to use YouTube as a marketing strategy. And Zach, you and I work a lot with broadband service providers. Some of them are using YouTube. We've seen some folks using YouTube really well, and I think in some really effective ways. But I'd love to see more people using YouTube. I think it's a fantastic channel. One of the things that I don't think gets discussed enough with YouTube is the fact that you can do custom audiences on YouTube just like you can do on Facebook, right? So if you want to upload a list to show videos to a very specific group of people, that's absolutely doable on YouTube. And I don't know what you've seen, but I haven't seen a lot of people taking advantage of that functionality, and I think it's a really underutilized part of YouTube.
I haven't seen much of it either, Gabe. And, I think there's a lot of opportunity there. As you mentioned, going in and building these custom audiences. Google's a very powerful advertising platform. So them having, the say on how YouTube functions as well, you're kind of combining the two of those. And like you said, building these custom audiences, reaching the right people, you can do all of this through YouTube.
Well, and I think it's really important too, whenever you're thinking about launching into a new channel, that it can't just be another channel. Like, don't go to TikTok and do TikTok content just because you think you need to. Don't go to YouTube and do YouTube content just because you think you need to. There needs to be a coordinated strategy of, what am I actually going to get out of doing this? What am I going to get out of actually putting content out here and sharing this content with my customers, with my prospects? And I think sometime, we've been talking, Zach, a lot about how YouTube is a great educational tool, and I think it really can be. And maybe that's your strategy. Maybe you just want to use YouTube as an educational tool. And so the most important thing for you is driving the amount of views. It's not necessarily driving clicks to a specific web page or something like that. That's okay. There's nothing wrong with that, but just be transparent and upfront with, hey, this is my goal that I'm trying to get out of YouTube. Am I way off base there? Or
I think you're totally on. And in the past, we've talked about, what type of content should I put on, different platforms. So definitely go back and listen to that episode if you haven't. But I think with YouTube too, you can think about what kind of content, should I be putting on YouTube, and what kind of content should I be putting on Facebook, and so on and so on. And I still think there's opportunity to sprinkle content and whatnot. But I think having that exclusive YouTube content and kind of knowing what your audience wants to see, and like we said at the beginning, Gabe, you kind of have to test and see what works and what doesn't, so you know. But if YouTube's new to you and not sure how to tackle that project, I think it's exactly what we said. You have to get in there and test and see how different videos on the platform respond to, or how your customers respond to these different videos.
Yep. Yes, but and if you know that 95% of your future customers are going to be using that application while they're online, you better be thinking about how you're creating content for them, because at some point they are going to be the people who are purchasing your services. And if you aren't thinking about how to use this as a strategy now, you're going to be behind when those people are 25 and trying to buy broadband service.
I think you're spot on, Gabe. Just to shift focus a little bit, looking away from YouTube, the same study talked about really all these social apps: Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, and Twitter as well. Gabe, what kind of insights did we see on that survey about these other non-YouTube platforms?
So again, I don't think it's probably a surprise to most people who are looking at this data, but Facebook has fallen off a cliff in this age group specifically. So the 13 to 17-year-old age group, Facebook in the 2014-15 study, 71% of teenagers were using that application. That's now down to 32%. And Instagram has seen growth. It went from 52 to 62. Snapchat has seen growth. It went from 41 to 59. Twitter also went down. So that decreased from 33 to 23. So you're seeing this divergence where Facebook and Twitter are both going down. Twitter was never really massive with this group to begin with. Instagram and Snapchat are going up. So if you're looking at getting advertising in front of kids on Facebook, probably not the right channel for you, right? You need to be shifting that over to, Instagram or TikTok or, some sort of channel like that. Just based on your kind of progression in social media, Zach, did those numbers surprise you at all?
I'm going to get in trouble for this next comment, Gabe. But when I think of Facebook, I think of that's my mom's kind of app, like that's the demographic. Yeah. I'm so going to get involved with that. That's the demographic I think that's using Facebook. And we saw the decline in this data. Young people are just not interested in Facebook. And just now, I just pulled up my screen time on my iPhone. So you can, for those, who don't have iPhones, it just shows you your most used apps. But, my number one app is Instagram. My number two app is TikTok. And Facebook's not even up here. Snapchat's next on that list. So, for the most part, like I'm seeing exactly the data that I'm looking at in this survey. Instagram is up, Snapchat is up. Those are the two of the apps that are high up on my list. TikTok's on there too, but obviously TikTok didn't exist back when the survey was initially conducted back in 2015. Yep. But these trends are very common, and I made the comment to you, Gabe, and we've talked about this on the podcast in the past too. But I'm just not a big Facebook user. I'll go and update photos every now and then and stuff like that. But if you see me like typing a text post or something, something's wrong. Like that's not supposed to happen.
It's just a cry for help.
Yeah, right. But then like it's Instagram, and I'll be posting, weekly, monthly, whatever that time frame may be. The other one on here, just speaking specifically, is I thought it was interesting that Twitter was actually down, and not that I'm surprised, so but I just feel like we have the age of the influencer going around. So I feel like that is just a platform that, I wouldn't expect tremendous growth from, but I am surprised to see that one going down from, was it 33% to 23%? So that was a little bit of a surprise to me.
Yeah. Yeah, I was surprised by that too. And I don't know if that's just because influencers have just gone to YouTube and TikTok, and so it's completely left Twitter behind. I don't know. I mean, Twitter's the social application that I use the most for sure. And it's not even posting stuff on Twitter. I'd never do that.
Oh, you're out here subtweeting everyone?
No, man, I would never do such a thing. No, I'm a consumer of content on Twitter. I actually find it very interesting and very educational, actually, in some cases. My Twitter feed has become super nerdy over the last couple of years. I think I've mentioned that on a previous podcast. But yeah, I was a little bit surprised by the Twitter decline as well. Definitely not surprised by Facebook. Your comment about, that's my mom's social media.
Keep bringing that up.
Yep, I'm just going to keep bringing this. Keep letting you dig that hole for yourself. But I think that's very accurate. And there's a not cool factor with Facebook anymore, right? It used to be that Facebook was cool. And now all of a sudden, when your mom and your mom's friends are on Facebook, all of a sudden it's not cool anymore. I wonder if that same thing starts to happen with TikTok, because TikTok is getting more broadly adopted by a wider age group, right? And at some point, do people go, wow, this isn't cool anymore. Now everybody's here, right? It's not exclusive anymore, right? It's not the club that nobody can get into. All of a sudden everybody's in it and it's not cool anymore.
And Gabe, I think part of that too is there's always going to be a new app coming out, a new website coming out, some new platform coming out. Like I said, like when this study was initially conducted, TikTok didn't even exist. And now here it is, what, number 2 on this list now? It's high up there. So seeing TikTok.
It was number 2.
Yeah, so seeing TikTok so high up just years after this, whole launch and, everything took place, it just shows you that these disrupting platforms can come out of nowhere and change everything. And I think that's what Facebook is seeing right now, is they're seeing all this competition, people fleeing to new apps and trying these different platforms out. And it's putting Facebook's, big audience at risk.
Well, I think it goes to show that purchase of Instagram a few years ago was very wise, because if they did not do that, they would be in serious trouble, right? And probably WhatsApp as well. I mean, I know they kind of sucked up a few of these other apps and put it into the Meta platform now, right? But I mean, if they didn't do that, they would be in real serious trouble. But you mentioned this idea of new apps popping up, and you're absolutely right. There's going to be some other app that pops up in another 5 years that people are using, right? That's just the natural progression of things. One that I don't see going away, though, is YouTube. And the reason I say that is because they're owned by Google, and Google is an absolute freaking behemoth, and they know how to keep people on and in their platforms. At some point, does that business model break? Yeah, maybe, but not anytime soon. And so if you're looking at, okay, I've got limited resources and limited time, and I need to make sure that whatever whatever I'm going into is going to, really drive the most benefit, I would argue YouTube is probably the number one channel that I would be focused on right now because of its breadth, because of how many people engage with it across all kinds of socioeconomic groups and age brackets and so forth. And I don't see it going away anytime soon. Maybe I'm rose-colored glasses on that, but I can't imagine a situation where it changes dramatically in the next.
Oh man, YouTube's gonna shut down tomorrow. I can just feel it. No, I agree, Gabe. YouTube it's such a big platform. There's so much content on it, and
Yeah,
there's people have tried to come and disrupt YouTube's massive growth and everything, and no one's been able to really do that yet. Obviously, these platforms adapt as competition comes and goes, but
sure.
YouTube is it's growing. We saw that data, but it hasn't changed as drastically as Facebook has. That big drop we saw.
Yep, agreed. Yeah, if anything, it's headed the other direction, right? Where it's gaining more adoption for these groups. So there were a couple other just kind of quick data points that came out of this research study that I thought were particularly interesting. One of them was that 95% of teens have a smartphone, and that was up from 73% in the 14-15 study. The other part of that they asked was the desktop, laptop, and gaming system. And those numbers were up a little bit, but they were pretty much flat. But I do think it's really interesting that smartphone adoption has continued to grow. And, now basically, 95% of teenagers have a smartphone.
Let's talk about that, Gabe, because
yeah.
I'm interested in hearing other people's viewpoints. Obviously, we mentioned like the generational differences here, but to me that seems normal. Like is that you have kids. Would you give your hypothetical teenage kids a smartphone? Because to me that just feels like what you do. But obviously you can.
I can't imagine.
Obviously, you can
I can't imagine I'm not going to be able to.
Yeah, and it's weird because I feel like I don't know, 20 years ago, 10 years ago, I don't know what the timeline here would be. I shouldn't say 20 years ago, but I feel like in the past, like having a phone, let alone a smartphone, for you teens would have been like they don't need a phone kind of thing. But like here, I'm thinking like, oh yeah, like everyone needs a phone or they need some kind of communication device, and smartphone's basically all you have now. So it's basically just an unlocked ticket to all these different apps.
Well, and I think it's a comfort level too for parents. Once teenagers are going out on their own, going to their friend's house, things like that, at least you have some way to stay in contact with them through a smartphone. Now they may not necessarily answer you all the time, but at least in theory there's a communication channel there. So I can't imagine my kids not having a smartphone when they reach teenage years, right? I don't know how I'm going to be able to avoid it. And I think peer pressure becomes a part of this too, right? It's, well, all my friends have phones, why can't I have one too, right? And then you kind of feel like you have to relent because all of the other parents have relented too. And so the momentum just kind of builds on itself. But the other part of this that I thought was particularly interesting, moving us into the last point here, was that 54% of teenagers said it would be hard to give up social media. And obviously there's a direct correlation here between percentage of kids with a phone and percentage of kids that say it would be hard to give up social media because, as you said, Zach, the app's on their phone. They're engaging with social media through these phones. So there's a direct correlation between those two things. But that's the struggle that I'm going to have as a parent here in a few years is, how do I find that balance between giving my child the technology that I need to in order to stay in contact with them, but still creating some sort of guardrails around, them just going completely off the rails with, social media activity and other activity on their phone.
Well, Gabe, let me know how that goes. I'll let you kind of trial that, and I'll just pick up advice from you, constantly learning from the other people on the team. But
I'm so terrified.
But it's I don't know anything, but I think it's a good statistic, Gabe. Though talking about teens giving up social media, but even looking at like you and I, though, Gabe, would you find it difficult to give up social media apps?
Yes, absolutely.
Which app would be the
totally
number one like most difficult to give up? Because for me, I think it would be Snapchat. I do a lot of communicating through Snapchat, and if I didn't have that, like I wouldn't know where people are at on Snap Maps. I wouldn't know how to contact half my friends. I'd have to go and look them back up in iMessage and whatnot. But I use Snapchat more than I use iMessage on my iPhone. So that's like my number one app, followed by Instagram. I just love seeing like pictures of what everyone's doing and like showing whatever I'm doing too. But I would say Snapchat and Instagram would be my like most difficult. Gabe, I'm guessing you have different apps though. NCAA, that's going to be your app you can't give up, isn't it?
Yeah. No, that's fine. I only care about that for 2 weeks out of the year. Twitter, for sure. Twitter would be the hardest one for me to give up. I love Twitter. It's stupid. It's funny. It's educational. It's all kinds of different stuff, all wrapped into one ridiculous app.
Man,
I love it.
That would be one of the easiest ones.
It would be really hard for me to give that up.
Facebook would be the easiest one for me. Like if I didn't have a Facebook account tomorrow, my life would be totally unaffected, right? Like,
same,
I can't think.
I mean, I basically don't have a Facebook presence, so that's fine for me. I'd give that up.
Yeah, if you had to give up LinkedIn though, that's another conversation, right?
Well, yeah, then I might not have a career, so that would be a problem for me there. Yeah, if I had to give up LinkedIn, I'd be sad just because I wouldn't have any place to post all my musings. But from a personal perspective, Twitter would definitely be the hardest one to give up for sure.
That's super interesting. I try to tweet once a year, and I haven't tweeted yet in 2022. I'll retweet stuff, but like I haven't like had original content on Twitter yet this year. So everyone, keep an eye out because it's coming soon.
I feel like I need to start posting clips of our podcast on Twitter or something just to have
one of these days. I'm gonna come across Gabe's Twitter account now, and it's just gonna be like a bunch of like video clips of like Gabe and I on the podcast, and I won't be surprised at all.
No, don't be surprised. That's what'll happen for sure.
Oh man,
too funny.
Well, Gabe, that's.
Well,
go ahead. I'm just wrapping up here, Gabe. I mean, we talked about all these different social media apps today. We didn't really talk about the content you could put on those, but we've talked about that plenty in the past. But I mean, big message here is understanding your audience. We always say know your data, know your customers, know the data you have. This falls right back into that. We have the data now saying, hey, these are the apps people are using compared to what is it, 8 years ago, 7 years ago, whenever this study was taken. So I think there's so many takeaways from this, and it gives you the opportunity to go back and say, hey, why am I not using YouTube, or how can I use YouTube, and what do I need to do to kind of advance my marketing initiatives to align with these platforms.
I love it, man. That's well said. I couldn't have said it better myself, Zach. I think that's exactly right. How can we take this information that we know about how people are going to be engaging with the internet going forward and use that as a way to inform your marketing strategy?
I'll close off with one of my
I'm
favorite quotes. And I was actually just telling Sandy on the team about this today, but I said, when people say this, it makes me so mad. I want like a sign on my wall and like some like motivational quote, not to say this, but we've always done it this way. Why should we change? I absolutely hate that. And that's the kind of mindset that's going to get you behind. If you're not thinking about these platforms today, you definitely don't want to be thinking about them, yesterday. Like, oh, should I have done this yesterday? Or, what could I have done differently? No, go out today and figure this out yourself. But go out today and really adapt your content, build that strategy. Don't be left behind on this one.
Agreed. Well said.
All right, Gabe. Well, let's leave it on a high note then. So thanks everyone for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed this discussion on social media and all this data. And again, we will be sharing this study in the podcast notes. Gabe, don't let me forget to share that data too. Lots of good information in this study. So also don't forget to give us a follow on your favorite podcast app. And if you'd like, check out our video podcast on Spotify and YouTube. But as always, feel free to connect with both Gabe and myself on LinkedIn. And that's all we had for this week, but we'll see you soon.